Hello and welcome to the conversation right here on News Central Television. I am Rita Omodia. On the conversation, we get to discuss trending political stories around the African continent. Now, on today's edition of the conversation, we will be discussing INEC's National Commissioner's comment, Festus Okoye, on the glitch encountered during the upload of the February 25 presidential election in Nigeria and the introduction of proof of ownership certificate levy of 1,000 naira for motorists. And later on the show, we would look at the political situation in Zimbabwe, where the Citizens Coalition for Change has issued a 24-hour ultimatum to 41 fraudulent candidates affiliated with the opposition party led by Nelson Chamisa. We'll have the discussions after this break. Stay with us. Now we begin in Nigeria, where the Independent National Electoral Commission has addressed the glitch encountered during the upload of the February 25 presidential election in Nigeria. INEC National Commissioner Festus Okoye emphasized that this technical issue should not undermine the entire nationwide elections. Okoye's response came after the European Union Election Observation Mission submitted their final report on the 2023 general elections on Monday. He urged Nigerians not to pass judgment on the Electoral Commission solely based on the challenge faced during the upload of the presidential election results. Meanwhile, announcement of the introduction of the proof of ownership certificate verification fee of 1,000 naira by the federal government is generating reactions. Starting from July 2023, Lagos State will initiate the collection of this fee from motorists. And joining us for this discussion, we have Dr. Jide Johnson. He's the Director of Special Programs, Nigerian Institute of Journalism. He joins us from Lagos, Nigeria. We also have Adenike Aloba. She is the Program Directorate of DataFight. She joins us from Abuja in Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you for having me. Barakat Salah to all our Muslim brothers and sisters all over the world. Eid Mubarak to every one of them.
Definitely. Eid Mubarak to all our Muslim viewers across Africa, of course, the rest of the world. And talking about the conversations at hand on this special day, I mean, judging from the general conduct of the previous elections, Jide, would you agree with the Independent National Electoral Commission that glitches witnessed does not totally mar the elections? Because you're saying Nigerians should not judge them due to few glitches here and there in the presidential election.
Now, you set the benchmark, you give the assurances, you heighten the hope of Nigerians, you encourage them to register, and Nigerians en masse went and registered for the election. For the very first time, we had a lot of first-time voters participating in the electoral process, the younger generation, as a result of the enthusiasm you've created with your various publicity program and your various actions here and there. And then you ask Nigerians for support. And through the National Assembly, every money requested for was made available. You also required the support of Nigerians. Pressure was exerted on the executive to finally assent to the electoral bill into an act in 2022, which INEC itself termed as the game changer, because you said you are going to deploy technology and you are going to have real-time results, and that the votes of Nigerians for the very first time will count. You made all of these promises, and at the end of the day, you failed to live up to your own promises. So what do you expect from Nigerians? To give you a pat on the back, to applaud you, or to sing praises of you, or for them to question your capacity to conduct basic election where you have been given all the requirements to succeed. So as far as I'm concerned, the INEC Director of Publicity and Voters Education is just playing to the gallery, is playing the ostrich. A lot of, to whom much is given, I'll end with this so that my colleague can contribute. To whom much is given, much is expected. And that much which was given to INEC, less was gotten from it by Nigerians.
I'm going to pick up on that last line you said, to whom much is given, much is expected. But we also know the issues that technology can bring. And as much, some people are saying, just like INEC is saying that, these are just few issues that were encountered. Now, for you, Adenike, in your candid opinion, what measures could be used to characterize a free and fair election that Nigerians have so much clamored for? And do you think that this excuse that is given by INEC is justified, looking at how technology can be generally? Adenike, can you hear me? Okay, while we wait to get Adenike online with us, I'm going to... All right. Go on, please, if you can hear me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I mean, so can you hear me bit is kind of like a good way to look at this because technology is junky. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, go on.
Okay, so technology is janky, especially because of the state of our infrastructure in Nigeria, the depth of penetration of the internet itself. And so while it is no excuse for INEC, they had 4 years to prepare for this. Nobody forced their hands to use technology. They told us it was going to be game changing. It is understandable and should present sort of like a way for us to begin to think about the next 4 years, to begin to say, okay, how do we resolve the issues that we know that technology has? I do not absolve INEC, of any of their, or nor do I agree. I think that Mr. Festus would have done well to take that report from the Observer Mission and say, okay, we see where we've done wrong and we're going to do better, rather than attempting to justify, sort of like what they did. But I do know that technology does require some work. It does require some attention, and especially in our climate where we know that we have challenges with technology. I think the stakes of the election kind of also blurred. We didn't allow, it did not, we didn't allow the realities of the country we live in to regulate our expectations about the election. And so I think that now that we know that technology can play an important role, and we know that the infrastructure around technology can impact on how technology plays this role, we can then begin to ask, going to clap only if you do what you promise. So yes, technology can be challenging, but then we have an opportunity ahead of us now to begin to ask the broader question of technological infrastructures, of the penetration of internet in the country. And the good thing is, if we begin to address these problems, it not only solves our challenges with the election, it solves a lot of problems across board as a country. It solves a lot of developmental problems, or begins to solve developmental problems for us. So no, their excuse is it's an excuse, but it is understandable in the context of just how challenging technology can be. I mean, we're on this call right now, and there's a bit of, oh, can you hear me? Are you there? It's the reality of technology in the country, but we have an opportunity now. I always like to look forward. Okay. Because we can't turn back the dial of time and say, oh, let's redo it all over again. How do we do it better the next time? How do we make sure they do it better the next time? And it's to begin to pay attention to those infrastructural issues that need to be dealt with so that technology can do what it's supposed to do in an election.
Now, still on this issue of technology, because this is what is bringing about this issue there. We've been clamoring for free and fair elections and talking about this electoral bill that was transmitted because of this, so that we could have electronic transmission of results. Now, Jide, that's going over to you there, because you said there was a lot of expectations that INEC gave, and they gave a lot of promises for it. Now, still looking at future elections and looking at the whole impact of technology, what do you think can be done to make sure that, for better elections in future elections, and we were still having elections in November for by-elections, what can be done to make sure that these sort of things are dealt with?
Of democracy is for the will of the people to succeed at the end of the day. And the vote cast is what determines who is elected, and not the votes manipulated by those that are charged with that responsibility. The challenges we have always had in the past has to do with the collation and announcement of results, not actually what happens at the polling units, but what happens at the collation center. And INEC brought about beavers with respect to accreditation and with respect to real-time viewing of results. And they talk about IRF, which ordinary citizen could visit and check the result in real time.
Yeah.
And it was said it's to be a game changer. So as far as every one of us is concerned, deploy it, don't manipulate the process. We have seen thus far that there are various attempts to sabotage that process. How do we forestall that in future? How do we prevent that from
I want you to talk more about that manipulation you're talking about, because this is very serious grave allegations against INEC.
The word manipulation is deliberate tampering with a process. Now, it's a deliberate tampering with a process, altering the process of something. So now, when you have a technology and there is an human attempt to reverse the course of that technology, that's manipulation. You'll recall the technology did not work for the presidential result. It worked for the National Assembly election. How do you explain that? Based on what we have had thus far, the technology worked for the gubernatorial election and the House of Assembly election. Now, 3 elections were held on the same day in February 25th. For 2 of the elections, it worked. For one of the elections, which is a critical election, which is a one constituency, the presidential election is a one constituency election. It did not work. So you begin to ask that question, where did it really go wrong? What were the things that we did right and we didn't do right? And what are the things that we need to? As far as this issue is concerned, it is for us to allow the process to take its focus and to hold those accountable. You see, when you give somebody responsibility, they must give an account of the responsibility you have given to them. Is to hold people accountable. Is to hold them. Look at the huge amount of money we budgeted for the deployment of this technology. Look at the huge amount of money we have spent on this election, the entire electoral process, the voters registration, voters education, then the actual conducting of the election. So if you look at the amount of money, are we getting the appropriate return on investment? That's the question. So if you are not getting the appropriate return on investment, people should be held accountable. People should be prosecuted for failure to do the basic constitutional requirement, the basic institutional requirement that they've been empowered to do. And that's the problem. But that's not the issue in Nigeria. It seems as if it's business as usual. You know what? We glossed over what happened in 2019. We came to 2023. I can assure you, we glossed over what happened in 2023. And then in 2027, we'll be repeating the same thing again over and over and over again. And then we seem to be in a vicious cycle, not making any progress. The bottom line is to hold people accountable. Look at what happened in Adamawa, for example. If what happened in Adamawa had been allowed to succeed, now the beneficiary of that outcome will be the governor today, and the non-beneficiary of that outcome will be in court challenging the illegality of the action of the resident electoral commissioner for that place. And what have you had concerning that case? What have you had concerning that case? Technology on its own cannot have problem. It is the manipulation of people that have been employed or that have been empowered to deploy the technology that creates. You might have glitches here and there, but you don't have. What we had was a total collapse. What we had was a total collapse.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. You've raised a very valid point. Now, we talk about manual manipulation, and that was why there was now electronic transmission. But unfortunately, you're alleging to electronic manipulation also and a total collapse of the old system. Now, still on this, I'm going to go back to Adenike. And in terms of voter accreditation, Okoye maintained that nobody has faulted the functionality of the bimodal voter accreditation system, that is the BVAS, that is what's used to accredit people. I don't know if you, of course, if you participated in an election, and I'm sure your polling units and what exactly you observed from friends and relatives, would you agree with this assertion that there was no fault in the functionality of the BVAS that Festus Okoye has said?
Okay, if I mean the network is a bit, I'm struggling a little bit, but if you're asking about the voter accreditation process,
Yes.
we know that there were places where it worked well, and there were places where it didn't work quite well. So there are two things that are at play here, and just allow me to quickly reference, the last questions you asked, Mr. Jide, and it's that this is the one thing that we need to pay attention to. The Electoral Act, the 2022 Electoral Act, did not say that they will do it with technology. It actually left it open for the commission to determine how it wants to transmit elections. That in itself is almost like a catch-22, because now they have said they will do it a certain way, and they were not able to achieve that properly. But I think that it's important. Yes, I hope that the law will take its full course. The provisions of the Electoral Act 2022 says that the officers in charge, they are the ones liable. So there is no instance where the entirety of INEC is going to be punished for this. It's that the people have to come forward and say, oh, this person who managed this polling unit is responsible for manipulation and all of that. Now, so the reality is, I monitored elections on elections day, both for national and state elections. And the reality is, yes, there were challenges with accreditation in some places, but we also have records of people staying to vote up until 2 a.m. in the morning, which means that the thing might not have worked before because there were eyes on them and there were people reporting and people talking about it. They stayed and made sure that everybody who was there registered. We also have details of polling units where nobody showed up. There were not a lot of people who showed up. So the problem is, look, a human system where we have human beings, given the state of our country, given the depth of corruption that we know as a country, it will take time for us to, and I agree, we have to pay attention to it. We have to call it out. But much more than saying you did bad, we also then have to bear some responsibility on, okay, how can we help you do it better? How can we point the way to doing it better? This is the way to check, the human challenges that can crop up and mess up technology. And this is the way to check infrastructural challenges that will mess these things up. So, I mean, I trust that, whatever is happening in courts will happen, but I'm looking ahead and saying, look, there's an off-cycle election starting in November. How do we make sure that we're not back again on News Central talking about how it did not work or how it did work in Kogi and all of these places that elections is going to happen? What can we do? These are the questions we need to now start posing to INEC. Are we again going to have challenges with upload? What problems are you having right now? How do you want to solve it? We need to begin to ask them those questions ahead of November. One, it's awareness that people are watching. We've not all gone to sleep because the general elections are over. Our eyes are still on this. Two, it gives an opportunity for those who want to engage, for those who want to help, to say, okay, this is how we can support you in this way, or this is how, I mean, Nigeria is like the tech hub of Africa. And it seems like is having challenges, using technology in its election. So how can these tech hubs that we have, the tech talent that we have, help? This is the time to begin to pose those important questions to INEC to make sure that whatever challenges we had with the general elections in February and March, it does not repeat in the off-cycle elections, but also we are not back here in 4 years' time saying, oh, see how these things went bad again. This is my slight departure from a lot of the, INEC failed us. Yes, INEC failed us. How do we make sure they don't continue to fail us? How do we keep our eyes on them? What are the important things? How do we look at the Electoral Act and say, okay, perhaps if we can, and I know this is asking a lot, perhaps if we can go back to that Electoral Act and modify and make electronic transmission not just at the prerogative of the commission, but something that is by law, or something that is by law. How do we, is there some room to begin some kind of advocacy, for some kind of lobbying to make sure that electronic transmission, because at the end of the day, when INEC is done telling you, oh no, we tried, we did our best, then they come back and tell you, guys, this is really at our prerogative, and we have been nice by doing this. And I know I'm taking some liberties with how they describe this, but that's the reality. So where do we need to focus attention now? How do we make sure that Beavers achieves or does what it's supposed to do? What kind of eyes on the ground? What kind of accountability and transparency system can we begin to mount up now ahead of these off-cycle elections to make sure that, hey, guys, you are repeating this mistake again, or, oh yeah, you dealt with this, which means you listen. I think it's important that we begin to look at it from that perspective.
All right, thank you so much, Adenike. And still on these modifications, Jide Johnson, I'm still hammering on what Okoye said and saying that nobody faulted the functionality of the beavers. We'll also remember that within the whole process, before the governorship election, there was a reconfiguration of the IREF portal. We saw situations like that. So moving forward, do you also oppose to what happened then? And what are the remodifications that you think will be needed for future elections when we're looking at November by-elections? Because you talked about the fact that there has been manipulation of the whole process.
Well, I don't. The issue of the configuration is a major issue at the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal. We wait for the outcome of that decision to see, and a lot of people have spoken with respect to the assurances INEC gave with respect to whether the reconfiguration will not affect the storage of the results of the presidential election. Let's wait for that particular outcome. But the question, well, we have also seen from other tech experts saying that there was no basis or no need for that configuration at that particular point in time. At the end of all the petitions at the Election Petition Tribunal and the Supreme Court will come to reality with what Adenike said with respect to areas that we need advocacy to ensure that it will not only be in the guideline, because in the INEC guideline, it was INEC that wrote the guideline themselves that talked about. It's not in the act, but in the guideline, in the policy framework for the election, INEC itself pointed out that there will be electronic transmission of the result through the use of the technology they have deployed, and they didn't comply with their guideline. So we hope at the end of the day, those issues highlighted will form the basis of the advocacy for the review of the Electoral Act 2022. Because if you...
Dr. Johnson, are you still with us? Okay. All right, while we're still trying to get Dr. Johnson, I'm going to go over to Adenike, and still on this issue. I mean, while we still have elections issues there, and there's a lot of postmortems on how well Nigeria went with the election, we also have issues of this certain fee that has been given, because we saw a statement by the Minister of Transportation, Abdulaziz Totola, on this proof of ownership certificate track. I'm moving away a bit from election matters now to other situations at hand in Nigeria. And he talked about the car theft and recovery of stolen vehicles and the fact that Nigerians would have to pay 1,000 naira for this particular fee. With all what that is going now, do you think that this will be realistic? Do you think that this will achieve the aim that the ministry has set?
Okay, so Mr. Toriola and what he said about, oh yeah, car theft, that made me laugh, because I thought, really, you need to charge me a little extra in a country that has a police, in a country that has a functional interior ministry.
Okay, so Adenike, just hold on that thought. Just hold on that thought. We'll get back to you. I think we have Dr. Johnson with us. So, Dr. Johnson, I'll allow you to complete your thoughts on the final statements you were making while we also talk about the issues at hand of the 1,000 naira that the Ministry of Transportation has said from the federal government, talking about the proof of ownership certificate verification fee. So, first of all, let's finalize your thoughts on the modification of the electoral process and the situation at hand at the moment.
And the one highlighted by the EU electoral observers report that was presented yesterday will form the basis of the advocacy for the review of the Electoral Act of 2022 moving forward to 2027. On the issue of the new tariff or taxes that has been introduced with respect to proof of car ownership, that I have to prove my ownership of the car, there are some of the things that I hope that this government will leave to all what it has campaigned for, as far as Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu is concerned, he's been an advocate for deregulation. He's been an advocate for devolving powers to the constituent units. He's been an advocate for power going back to the local government, the state government, and adequate sharing of power among the constituent unit for us to have both fiscal federalism and then operational federalism. And that's the reason why when he established 37 local development council areas in Lagos State under Obasanjo administration. And I hope that
Jide Johnson, can you hear us?
that those local government will be ready. The issue of correction.
Okay, so while we're trying to get Dr. Johnson, Adenike, I think you have the floor now. So I want you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, all right, wonderful. So let's have your own take on all of this, because a lot of Nigerians have been complaining, I mean, since yesterday, and we have other documents that car owners pay. So would you agree with this initiative? I mean, we're looking at a situation where somehow we're having duplications of functions in Nigeria. We're trying to reduce costs. We're looking at the whole, economy and all of that. Is it actually necessary?
Yeah. So as to the necessity of a 1,000 naira proof of ownership verification certificate, I'm struggling to find the necessity. I think that in terms of policy decisions, I think that we're rethinking, revenue generation for the country, and perhaps this is one such way to, collect taxes where necessary. The problem is that these amounts to multiple layers of taxation that Nigerians have to deal with. How do I go through a very hectic process, by the way, to renew my car papers every year, and you still want me to go through a separate process, pay a separate money for proof of ownership certificate? Why are all these things not streamlined in a way that, one, operationally doesn't stress Nigerians, and two, we really do have to respond to the question of multiple taxation? We're paying payee taxes, there's so many layers. We're paying VAT, and I know that there's a lot of talk around the fact that, Nigerians are not taxed enough, that we're one of the lowest taxed countries in the world. While there's some legitimacy to that argument, the bigger issue is that it's not so much that we're not taxed enough, it's that the administration of taxes is poor. And so even in the taxes that are being collected, is not being properly collected. So if the government is looking to taxes for revenue generation, they have to figure out how to streamline all these taxes, because that's one of the real issues, in that even the taxes you are collecting right now, you're not able to collect it well enough. So if you've not figured that out and you're introducing new taxes, I wonder, are you feeling the temperature of the people at all? Subsidy has just been removed. There's a lot of noise that, electricity tariff is going to be increased. And now we're introducing a new layer of taxation for people to pay some amount of money. We already have to renew our driver's licenses every 3 years or 5 years. We already have to renew car papers. We already have to pay for car insurance. And now, again, you're introducing a new layer of taxation. I understand that the government does have to take action. And, like Mr. Johnson was saying before, Network knocked him off about how, devolution of powers and having local government, get some autonomy and operational federalism. And I get that. I know that means that at the local government level, some taxes will be introduced. Some taxes exist already. And so when I'm talking about synthesizing all this tax collection operations, this is what I mean. Why is there a new tax being introduced when they're not efficient in collecting taxes like the tenement rates, and all of these other taxes? So I would say, on one hand, Nigerians are kind of tired. We're being taxed everywhere, and this is government tax. Not to talk of what is known as black tax, where because of the economic situation in the country, you have multiple people taxing you on whatever income you have. There's that on that one level, but on a policy formulation and policy operationalization level, yes, the government needs to generate revenue. Yes, tax is going to be a significant part of that. Yeah. But I think that a bigger problem when it comes to taxation is less about increasing the number of taxes that people pay, and more about finding a way to streamline, to have proper operations around the collection of existing taxes. So on two ends, it's just not kind of
definitely
easy, because
definitely
again,
lots of things. You talked about the operationality of all of it, the necessity of all of it, and I'm sure you've spoken the minds of a lot of Nigerians. It's been a wonderful conversation. We went from talking about the elections procedures, talking about the IREF portal, the beavers, and now we're concluding with this proof of certificate ownership of cars that the government has put in. That's a 1,000 naira levy. Thank you so much, Dr. Jide Johnson and Adenike Aluba, for joining us on this conversation. Definitely continue to have such conversations that center around the policies in Nigeria. Thank you for joining us in the conversation.
thank you very much for having me.